Welcome to the SMBAdvertising podcast, where our aim is to help 1 million small and medium-sized businesses to succeed with their advertising. My name is Mike Damjanovic. I'm an ad line specialist, and I'm the host of this really special podcast, which is aiming to bring value to our listeners. My aim is really to inspire, to educate, and to help all of our listeners to succeed with their advertising. So today we have a very special guest joining us. His name is Sigurd J. He's the managing director at Koppler, which is a full-service marketing company based here in Oslo, Norway. Sigurd has built and scaled several agencies in design, advertising, and media over the past 20 years. He has tactical and strategic content plans, and his team and himself help guide clients through the jungle of digital mysteries and obstacles. He loves technology, and especially when that technology can actually benefit and is useful for society. So Sigurd, welcome. It's great to finally get a chance to record an episode with you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, and I'm really excited to delight our listeners with your knowledge. So I think what we could do is maybe start with, maybe you could say a little bit about Koppler. What are you doing there and how are you helping your customers?
So Koppler is a marketing agency that is specialized in the areas where the other big agencies are not so much focused. So we work a lot with B2B companies. We work a lot with, say, medium-sized companies. What's special about them is very often they have something new that they're bringing into the market. And often it's a bit complex to talk about. So although I say that we specialize in B2B, it's not that we don't do consumer marketing, but consumer goods and the type of marketing that they need, what we found is that that's quite easy to find. It's the other stuff that we kind of think is more interesting. So my background is I worked in some of the biggest advertising and media agencies, and we were helping our clients, and it was a lot of fun. Now, what happens in that world is you have, as an advertiser, you have big budgets, but most of the companies in Norway, where I come from, they're not involved with consumer goods or consumer brands. Most companies aren't big advertisers. They often work, there could be medium-sized business, it could be business to business, it could be industry, technology. So we wanted to look at, what type of marketing are available to these, and particularly when it's like a human selling to another human, and for some who may not be in the e-commerce space, or at least not as much. So that was the focus with Koppler. So we started out as an agency that focused on building advertising services on top of marketing automation. And the first companies who wanted to use that was typically companies that were involved in doing automations themselves. So that would be software companies. Now, what we found as we came here with this sort of toolbox of great new marketing automation tools is that, yes, they do make life easier. But if what you're selling is a technology, it's an innovation, it's something new, what it requires of whoever's receiving that communication, your potential client, it requires a lot of them. So they have to understand this thing that's new, and they have to trust. If this is a new brand new company, I haven't heard about it. It's like, okay, so you're saying this thing, but why should I trust that it's you? And they have to remember it. And what you're asking really is that they make a change in their life, so that they, instead of using this old thing, they need to change their habits, they need to change their ways a little bit in order to get the benefit from this new nice thing that you're selling. And that requires quite a lot of your communication. So what we found was that we came from sort of a technology perspective in terms of marketing, say, hey, marketing automation, these are fantastic tools that can do a lot for you. And certainly they do, but you kind of come full circle in that it means that the message becomes so much more important when the tools are easy to use. And we work a lot with founders, smaller businesses. We get very, very close with them. And I think they were quite lucky in that we get to help them with bringing their really exciting stories out, because these companies, often like founder run, they're very heartfelt about what they're bringing into the market. They really want to help somebody with, through their products, through their services. So that's what we do.
And you mentioned this, you've been working with a lot of small mostly medium-sized businesses, specifically here in Norway. But over the last 20 years or so, you have seen that there are some areas within marketing that companies often are making mistakes. And I think actually you've written about the 10 most commonly made mistakes in marketing, which I think you have on your LinkedIn. But today, I've picked 5 of those pointers that I'm intrigued about. And I think, this is a good time to dive into the first one. And that is not using retargeting ads. So are there any sort of typical concerns that clients that you've worked with or are working with have about retargeting ads?
Yeah, so you're right. I have this list, and it's kind of like the 10 most common marketing fails. And I need to bring some context to that, because that's the 10 most common fails that I see now with the kind of companies that we work with now. So I kind of left the world of the big advertisers who have big budgets, they have big teams, they have lots of experience. And it's not like they don't use retargeting, or in fact, this list of 10 is kind of like, it's not for them. That list is for the rest of us. We too are a small or medium-sized business, and we too fall trap of these things. So it's the most common sort of fails, mistakes, and sometimes misunderstandings when you don't have that big apparatus of a big professional marketing team and huge budgets. And this thing with retargeting is, I think, it's one of the most misunderstood ones, and it's because of how the big advertisers are using it. So for them, it's just something that you add at the end, kind of, or it has been, it has kind of a bad reputation. So retargeting is often, by the end users, it's seen a little bit like pop-up ads. Do you agree? I mean, I'm sure when you mention what you do, for example, I'm sure you have some friends and family, and they say, "Oh, digital marketing, you work with advertising," and they will mention annoying retargeting as an example of how poor it is. And that's because it's very often used to try and sell something that you already bought, or that you already decided that I'm not going to buy this. So it seems really pointless. So the common use for it, particularly in the beginning, was that it was plainly tactical. It was meant to just remind you, hey, you looked at this thing. Now I'm reminding you to look at it again and click the buy button. But rather, what you should use it for, I think, is something quite different. And particularly if you aren't that big an advertiser, so if your budget is small, what you should think of it as, a way to prolong a dialogue. So if somebody comes to your site, they're doing a bit of research, maybe it's their first interaction with you, I think you should follow up with a really soft dialogue, sort of softly spoken, and focus on what's your brand message, what's your value propositions. So really, really sort of friendly, reminding people, try and maybe expand and build your communication universe a little bit. I'll give you some examples. We have a client, they were using a lot of search marketing. They were in the software as a service space, selling something is pretty complex. And their search marketing was stagnating a bit. It was sort of reaching plateau level, and we couldn't get very much more out of it. So we figured, okay, something has to be done here. And it was costing a lot, as it is. So what we did was, somebody came up with a clever idea, and it wasn't me. That's why I can say it's clever. Of saying, maybe we should focus more on the people who've been doing research, because what this company was selling is pretty complex. But not just try and push them, but rather make sure that they understand our values, what we stand for. So rather than try and explain more, and rather saying, hey, is there another feature that I can show you? They flipped it around. So what they did was, the team created, I think it was 4 or 5 small animated videos that has a sort of a brand logo animation, and then a little softly spoken explainer about what their brand was about. And they put that out on channels like YouTube, LinkedIn, like the common places that you could think of, small video ads, and accompanied by small brand-focused display ads as well. And what they saw in the 3 months following was that traffic from search increased by 50%, and the cost per click in search decreased by 30%. And the only variable that we changed during that period of time was to add brand messaging through just retargeting. So that's quite interesting to see that you were able to influence your audience that comes in via search who'd already been to your site. So what this tells us is that they searched again. So they searched, came to the site, did some research, left the site, were exposed to our retargeting messages, quite softly spoken brand messages, and then were more inclined to go back and search again and continue their research later on. So that, I think, was quite an interesting find. And so the reason that I say that retargeting is often overlooked is that sorry, the opportunities here is to use rich formats. You can use video, you can use big display, you can use native ads and have more content marketing in your retargeting audience. So often for a smaller company, it can be a little bit tricky to find which audience is yours because you're looking for a smaller subset of a large group of population. But at least the ones who have been to your site, they have shown some interest. So invest in them, make great content for them, and continue the dialogue. So that's my advice here.
Yeah, that is really sound advice. And when I think about that, then I always find it funny when often when I speak to customers, they say, you've got some sort of device in my phone because I was talking about AdLine, or I was talking about Poplar, and then suddenly these ads start appearing when I go to when I go to read a newspaper, or when I go on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube. Obviously, that's not the case, but I just want to touch on one thing. You mentioned obviously friends and families, or indeed customers. They can say, I find it annoying with all this retargeting. But is that in itself a reason not to retarget? Should companies be worried about, let me rephrase this, should they be overly worried about annoying people? What's your stance on that?
Well, from one point of view, it's very, very simple. So if you're a business owner, yes, everybody, including my kids, they think advertising is annoying. But if you're a business owner, what's the alternative? If you're unknown, if you don't have the customers that you want, what are your alternatives? People aren't just going to turn up at your site just by themselves. So I think that the premise of advertising, whether it's retargeting or something else, is that you're disturbing someone. That is the premise. So advertising is, generally speaking, it's a publisher, it's the media. They have the attention of an audience. Now, I come to, say, an online newspaper in order to read news, so they have my attention. They're selling parts of my attention to advertisers. So the advertiser knows that is the definition. I didn't come there to read the advertising. I came there to read news. So I think for any kind of advertising, the sender of the message needs to keep that in mind, that you are disturbing someone, so keep it short. And don't expect much. So you have to really format it in such a way that your message is remembered within a very, very short space of time. So for the companies that we work with, mostly they have something that's fairly complex that they're trying to sell. So it doesn't let itself be explained within the frame of 2 seconds, 3 seconds, or 30 seconds. So what that means is it needs to be accompanied by something else. So what we talk about is short format messaging and long format messaging. And I'm sorry to say, but your complex message just isn't going to fit into the short format. So again, this is where retargeting comes in quite handy to serve as a reminder. Whether it's annoying or not, I mean, ideally, you should make it annoying and most of the time, if it is annoying, it's because you're hitting the wrong people, so your targeting isn't right. If your retargeting isn't right, then that doesn't really make sense. Why should people be on your website if they're not looking for what you're selling? I wouldn't be overly worried about the annoying factor, because the alternative cost of just being invisible is pretty bad.
Great. So you also mentioned then about videos, and that's actually one of your next points that also I've seen a lot as well. You think video should be dead cheap. What is it that you mean by this, and what is what do you do you have any pointers around this?
So I could be polite here and say that this is a very common misunderstanding that we come across. Or I can be less polite and I can say, okay, this is one of my pet hates. So for the sake of entertainment in this podcast, I'll see if I can fire myself up a little bit. Now, this, what happens here, just to polarize it a little bit, is that the internet or the world has educated a lot of people to believe that video can be dead cheap. So animated videos, I'm sure we've all seen these, it was a bit of a fad a couple of years ago, this hand-drawn-ish type images with a voiceover over it. And somebody figured out how you can script those. So they're basically computer generated, and the voice is computer generated. All you have to do is supply, I suppose, some kind of drawing or something, or and a manuscript, and you'll get that back, and you can buy them cheap. It's like $100, $200, whatever. And then it's just one step up from that. It's animation movies that could be handmade, often offshored, and I'm all for globalization, so that's super cool that somebody in Sri Lanka or somewhere can get what is locally pretty well paid to make animations, but often it still has to be sort of boxed in, so that creatively speaking, you don't have time to really talk to somebody to make sure that your message gets through. And then there's this other case of it's like, oh yeah, my friend's son, he does something, he's bought a camera and he's studying something. I'm sure he can do this for 10,000 or I don't know, some whatever. So it's like, it's this idea out here, because there are examples of videos being produced super cheap. And if you just look at your phone, like the one that everyone has now, it can produce really, really high quality images. You can edit on your phone, etc. So what happens from my point of view is now, the internet loves video. Social media loves video. Advertising is better with film. So like one of our clients says, it's like bacon. Everything gets better with bacon. So everything gets better with video. And we come up with these ideas. Okay, we could make some films about this and that. And I say, okay, well, it doesn't have to be, be expensive. We say, well, no, it doesn't have to be expensive. But it turns out that their idea of not expensive and our idea of not expensive, they could be pretty far from each other. And the point here is that whichever method you choose to use to produce this video, whether it's scripted animation, some cheap animation somewhere, somebody just pointing their iPhone at something, it's what happens in front of the camera. It's the words, it's the message. Yeah. That is what makes good communication. And that requires that you actually sit down and think through, what am I going to say? What's in it for the viewer of this video, whether it be in the format of a social media post or an advertising or a video that you put on your website or something. What's in it for the viewer? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to convey? And that's not necessarily cheap. I mean, it is cheap, but it's cheap relative to what it was before. So say in Norway, where I'm from, if you go back like 10, 15 years ago, if you were to make an advertising, like a movie for 30 seconds shot for TV, a budget of anything less than 1 million kroner was considered super cheap. And now we're battling with we're trying to explain why it doesn't cost 10,000. It's like, yeah, I can give you this for 200,000, and that's a fifth of the price. That is cheap, but I can't do it for 20. Yes, I can point an iPhone at somebody, but it still has to be a script. It has to be, somebody has to know which words to be said. So that's why it's a bit of a dilemma, is that, as I said, the internet loves video, but it's not about the production method. Ironically, since it has become, the end result is film, the essence of it is words. Which words are the manuscript? What's the idea? And that does make a big difference if you have an idea, if you have a manuscript, and that you invest some time in that.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen that time and time again. I mean, the difference that a good video, well-scripted video can make, it can be shocking, really. But it's very interesting to you say that. Then it's not necessarily the production. The production is not necessarily the biggest cost, but it's actually the way that you're communicating. And we've done, I think, an episode on this before on the podcast where we talked about often a business owner will talk about will sort of communicate in such a way that it makes perfect crystal clear sense to themselves, but to their potential customers it's like, what are you talking about? I think someone gave an example about cars. I can't quite remember the brands, but there were people talking about 4-wheel drive, and then there was another way that another company was talking about it, and the way that this other company was talking about it was nonsensical for their potential customers. They didn't know what this word meant. Whereas, let's take Volvo, for example, they were communicating it as 4-wheel drive, and therefore So I think the way that you communicate that extra time and that extra, perhaps the extra money that you need to invest there is well worth when you get the reward.
Yeah. So what you're pointing out there is something that we come across quite a bit, and we have a way of describing that dilemma, which is, and often we work with technical companies. It could be engineering something. Is that for the absolute vast majority of companies, the people who buy your product, they aren't experts in your product, so they're not you. So people want to talk jargon. They want to talk about features. They want to talk about specifications. They want to use abbreviations because they think that it sounds more professional. It's very technical. It's very precise. And they assume that this is what their audience wants. Whereas in fact, their audience is probably quite busy doing something else. So what this ends up with is the dilemma that you mentioned, that the language that you're using, the communication that you use, it doesn't actually get through. So what we do instead is we want to help our clients talk about the problem that exists out there in society that is worth solving. And that's what their clients are trying to work on. It's like, hey, I have this job to be done to solve that problem. And then you come with a means to an end. It's, you come with a means to solve that. So that's our angle to tackle that.
Yeah, your stance on it. Yeah. So now we've almost just touched in on the content, and that leads nicely into the next point, which is named, "Do you think 10 articles is a lot of content?" Yeah. What do you mean by this?
Yeah. Okay. So that one's, it needs a bit of context. Some of the work that we do is for companies who are in a go-to-market phase. So they're starting from scratch. It's like, we're launching this thing. We're going to build it. So we're been in, say, product development mode, and now we are going into the market. So can you help build the website? Can you help sort of start spreading the word about this? And we say, yeah, cool, we'll do that. We'll make this content plan. And then, we come up with some plans and some ideas, and they go, whoa, 10 articles. I don't know. We don't have budgets for that. That's a lot. Do we really need that much? We get that a lot. And I understand your budget is low, but if you look at sort of gravity in terms of what does the internet want, does Google favor a website that has 5 articles over one that has, say, 10,000? People who come from the lab, say, we've been in product development mode for a long time, and now we're launching it, so we're in the go-to-market phase. They seem to very often have an underestimation of how much content you actually need to make in order to make your audience be able to sort of digest and understand what you're talking about. So it's not necessarily that sort of 10 articles, but it's a sort of, generally speaking, for anyone who needs to build a website where the job of that website is to capture and retain attention from their audience, you need fresh content all the time, and you need to draw people in through one page and then lead them on to the next and the third, and you need to expect them to come back later on and read a little bit about where they left off the previous time and then get in depth about something more. So generally speaking, people underestimate by far how much content they actually need in order to satisfy their audience.
Exactly, yeah. And I think also with my experience as well here at Adline, you start with one article and you think, oh, that's great, and you put it out and maybe you get some likes and some clicks, but maybe it doesn't lead to a customer straight away. But then you start to put the next one out and you become consistent. Now, obviously, I'm going a bit more into LinkedIn, for example, posting on LinkedIn. But I have seen a huge increase in leads coming in based on the content that I'm pushing out on a consistent weekly basis. So slightly different, but I think it's a way of bringing in new leads, but also offering this social proof that's so important. Now that we've got the leads coming in, that obviously leads very nicely into the next point, which is you're not following up your leads. What is the most common sort of mistake or issue then that you've been seeing with companies there?
So companies not following up on their leads. I'll try and explain that by telling a story. So a while back, this is a few years ago now, we're in early stages of this company, and I remember one of the project managers on one of the teams. She came back and she was a bit nervous in a client before a client meeting that was just coming up, because we've been running this campaign to do lead generation for this client, and she'd sensed that they weren't quite satisfied. Because it hadn't generated any sales. So I said, okay, well, has it generated any leads? Yeah, it did, but the leads, it just generated leads, but no sales. And I said, okay, so fair enough. How many leads have you generated over in the last campaign? It was 50 leads, and I was like, okay, fine. So she was going, okay, so we really need to increase that probably to like 500 leads or maybe 1,000 or more than that, because 50 didn't lead to any conversions, as in sales. And I said, okay, so we can increase from 50 leads to 500. That's obviously going to be a challenge if basically the same budget, you're kind of doing the same things. Like they're not going to come out of thin air. And then I remembered to ask, so fair enough. So we gave them all these leads. How many of those leads were called back by the client? And she goes, what do you mean? I'm like, well, so we gave them, it generated 50 leads. How many did they call? And she go, I don't think they called any of them. I'm like, okay, so hold on. So we gave them 50 leads. They didn't call any of them back. And now they want 500 leads who they're not going to call back. That doesn't make very much sense. I think, we probably need to look at a different stage of the funnel here. So I've seen this happen, maybe not quite to that extent, but I've seen that happen several times. That this is kind of where sales and marketing are disconnected. So we'd be hired as an agency to do something that was kind of meant to just generate clients, as in sales. But what the client wanted was probably to be talked to be called back. And I think it's just that it seemed just kind of so external, so anonymous, that there was this just a list of some weird names that they didn't know. And they probably weren't that used to calling people up and trying to sort of really sell. So that does happen a few times, that there isn't really a system in place to reach back. And if you think about it, if you think it for yourself, if you go into a website and you find the contact us form, or some other kind of form, and you say, okay, I've done my research, okay, so, or I'm sort of don't have time to do any more research, but hey, here's my contact information, then you're in the mode to be sold to right then. And that doesn't last for very long, because when you fill out the contact form, you probably don't stay on the website. You probably go on to do something else. You switch to your inbox, or you start reading some news, or go get a cup of coffee, or going to a meeting or something, and then your attention, it wanes. So you go from being sort of forward-leaning and saying, hey, okay, yeah, I need this, please call me back and sell to me, to being more and more sort of closed up again. So just being quick at getting back, not even just, getting back next week, but no, like immediately have somebody call back. And I've lost business on this myself. We were in the pitch, and that's one of the reasons when I asked, okay, why didn't we get this job? And that was being listed as one of the reasons, is that the other guys, they call back much quicker than you guys. Should have done something about that. So one of the things that we've done, for example, is we've set up an integration. So any kind of contact form on the website, absolutely any kind of them, it generates alerts for us in Slack. So people could be using other tools like Teams or whatever, but there's a real-time alert. So not just the one who's being contacted, but the whole team knows when somebody has tried to reach out. And we will see among ourselves, is anybody picking this up? And the essential thing about what we did here was not just that there is an alert somewhere, but the point is very, very clearly that you don't have to log in anywhere to find the alert. So the alert will come to you where you are in your daily life. And you fix those integrations, set it up. It's basically set up one time, and then make sure that people get disturbed. It's like dangle this thing in front of people's face saying, hey, somebody is at your door, they're knocking. Are you opening the door or not?
No, that's really good. And I think also when you it's not just about not following up your leads, but also how quickly you follow up. We have exactly the same. And I think that's actually a really good pointer for many of our listeners. I think a lot of our listeners are using Slack, because a lot of small, medium-sized businesses are using Slack. Then it's very, very easy to create this alert in a joint group where it's sort of, okay, let's follow up quickly. While our company is top in mind for that person that's actually just reached out to us. So that's really, really sound advice there. So I think
what needs to be added to that is that don't make it about the tool. The tools are there. Make it about the place. So make sure that the alert comes to where you and your colleagues are in your day-to-day life at work. The tools, somebody will help you set up the tools. That's a one-time job. But make it about the place, so that it's not hidden behind the login, so that it's not, you don't need to remind yourself, oh, I need to go and check those alerts. That's not good. The alerts need to come to you.
That's sound advice. Great. So we're coming on to our last point then, which I found quite interesting. You're trying to build a house with a budget for a tent, and I've heard a similar expression. You're trying to build a skyscraper, but you've only got 2 workers. And But what do you mean by this then in terms of marketing then?
So now this one is kind of maybe more difficult than it is controversial. But we work with quite a few. I think we've been in touch with more than 250. Been in touch with, as in they logged in our CRM system, so they've either been clients or we've been pitching to them. 250 different companies over the last 6 years. So, and what I kind of realize, I make this allegory that part of the basis of Copper is what I learned from all these big agencies I worked in, is that now you can make marketing and advertising so much more efficient than before. So that the allegory is that I can give you like a fantastic smart house with all kinds of wizard and widgets and full engine conservation. I can give you that for 2 million kroners, whereas an old unsmart house would have cost you 10 million to build. So what I give you is better, and it's a fifth of the price. And yet people come to us and say, yeah, but you have to understand that 2 million is really, really expensive. For what I have is 500,000. And that to me is like, no, that's you're trying to argue against gravity. So unfortunately, if you're in a go-to-market phase and or a scaling phase, very often what you're trying to do is you're trying to capture a bigger market by means of marketing. That's the point of marketing. And people have a pretty big tendency to underestimate just how much things cost. And that's because the alternative cost often is that somebody will do it internally. And the cost won't show up anywhere. It's like, oh, Lisa has been doing this, John has been doing that, and it's been free. No, it's not free, because they get paid salary. It's just that the cost is sunk somewhere, so you're not really seeing the numbers. But you can't really go for, I mean, if you can continue doing that, then maybe that is the thing that you should do. But at some point, at least when you come to an agency like us, like the minimum engagement level for us is a certain threshold level. And I can't really scale below that. So it's like, if you were to hire me as a part of that team, I'm consultants, like I can't really give you any good advice for half an hour each week. I can't think about your products, your market, and the customers, that what psychology drives them for half an hour. That's just like, how many clients should I be giving sound advice to for that? It's like, that it doesn't make sense. So, yeah, so that I think I've had that conversation a few times over the last few years where I'm trying to explain, if you want to do film properly, if you want to build this website, again, the 10 articles aren't going to cut it. Between now and 3 years ahead of time, you're probably going to have at least 100 types of different articles. So if you want to maintain a stable presence in social media, you need to keep producing things. And each of these, they will cost something, whether it's you do it by means of somebody who's already on your team, or you hire someone, or you hire an agency. But the threshold level for this is often a little bit higher than what people have been expecting. And when I talk to my clients about this, I hear sometimes from possibly a little bit sort of frustrated business owners that they're saying, well, I understand what you say, but you have to understand that this is the budget that I have, and I only have this, and we have to reach this target. And like, that's kind of a disconnect. You're trying to make me sort of obliterate the forces of gravity. I'm sorry, but I can't do that for you. Your marketing budget between here and a potential future where your company has grown to have become big is somewhere along that line. You have to invest properly in marketing in order to gain market share. Yeah. There's no other way to increase market share. Maybe you are sinking the cost in your own organization, but it's not free.
Yeah, and I think just to quickly jump onto this, then building a house. If there are companies there, they know they need to do marketing, they know they need to do advertising, and they know they need this house, but they don't have the budget for the whole house. I know because I've sat in a lot of customer calls and they want to take, okay, well, we'll take out the windows and we'll take out the staircase and we'll take off the roof. And then obviously you have an incomplete house. What's your advice there? Because for me, it seems that, okay, you know you want this house and you know that you need to do something. Perhaps then you start with a foundation, if that makes sense. I'm really getting into this house.
No,
example,
fair enough.
but...
So can you start with the foundation? Well, no, you can't really. So your analogy, I think it works pretty well. But where you can cut corners is you can reuse stuff. And one of the big cost savers that we've seen over the last few years is, for example, how you build a website. So use templates. The templates out there are good. They're really good. So one of the most common pieces of advice that we say to new clients coming to us, and they say, oh, this and that and blah, 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 and our website is not very good. We're not very proud of it. So we're thinking one of the things that we should do first is just build a new website. And in fact, we've talked to this agency who build websites based on this and that technology, and they're already giving us an offer, and it costs like 700,000. And for some reason, people are willing to invest like a bunch of money in creating lines of code for themselves to build website based on pretty old technology, when there are new websites out there on platforms like Wix, Squarespace, where you could just get like a shiny new website for next to nothing. And it's not just websites. You can do that for a lot of things. I mean, heck, look at the logo of our company. I made that with an AI tool online, and then we brushed it up a little bit afterwards. So there's so many ways to cut corners. I think that's what you should use communication and marketing automation tools for, and AI tools, cut corners. Because I understand that your budget is limited, but you can cut the corners on using templates, use pre-made technology, don't build things from scratch, borrow from others, and then make sure that what you do invest in is, one, your own message. You have to invest in the messaging. What are the words that we're trying to put out there? And number two, maintain visibility. Because a website that nobody comes to, it's not worth very much. So it's basically those two things. What do you say that people should care about? And how do you maintain visibility so that it's not just, oh, yeah, I had a post on LinkedIn last week. Yeah, well, that's died out now, isn't it? So, yeah, that's my advice.
I think also you mentioned that, you posted once on LinkedIn last week. There's not very many people, you're very lucky if people see that post. If it's just one post once in a blue moon, you need to be consistent. So this has been a great episode. We've gone through, retargeting ads, video, articles, content, following up on your leads, and then obviously this last point, trying to build a house with a budget for a ton. So this has been really educational. Thank you so much, Sigurd, for coming in and sharing your inputs and your knowledge on these points. And for those of you that are listening, then you can we're going to link to Koppler and also to Sigurd's LinkedIn profile, and you can also there see the full list of 10 most commonly made mistakes or misunderstandings that small and medium-sized businesses have been making and make. So
yeah, follow us. Let's post it on the on Adline's LinkedIn page, and if people have opinions, questions, let's do that in the comments field.
Yes, absolutely. We will certainly do that. So once again, Sigurd, thank you so much for your time today and for taking time out of your schedule. And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.